Good day. Now, I've talked about hardware emulation for years on this channel, but today we're going to go back to basics and take a look at how to get started emulating these classic games.
The concept of hardware emulation for video games dates back to the 1990s. It wasn't until that point that computers even became powerful enough to run even the simplest of emulators. The first emulator to truly capture the imagination of the gaming public was the rather humorously named Nesticle. This program was originally authored by Iser Edis and further developed by Bloodlust Software. Nesticle was first released in 1997 for Windows 95, and one cannot understate the importance of Nesticle and its effect upon the gaming community, as it offered gamers the ability to do things with NES games that were never before thought possible. I, in the 90s, did not know of its existence and wouldn't get into emulation until the heady days of 2008. Truly, that was the watershed year of my gaming journey, as that is the year that I fully embraced what was then retro gaming and entered the world of emulation. It was a random Friday night in 2008. I was browsing the internet on my then brand new Gateway laptop, and I found a website called Emulator Zone. Curious, I clicked on the link and found emulators for classic consoles, and well, I downloaded one called NEStopia, downloaded something called a ROM of Super Mario Brothers, and my world changed forever. Later, I would discover an arcade emulator called Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator, aka MAME, and that would lead me to discover Aliens, the arcade game, and thus that would help birth the General Lotz channel. Without emulation, I might not ever have met all those cool people or produced content for all y'all the fans. So, suck it, Nintendo! Now, thankfully for you Utes, you don't have to do much effort when it comes to emulating the various games of your forebears, as we now have a one-stop shop for all emulators. RetroArch was developed by LibRetro and was first released way back in 2010, and it's still being updated to this very day. It has been ported to a crap ton of systems, and forks of it can be found all over the bloody place. Today, we're looking at the Windows PC release that can be downloaded from the LibRetro website. I started using RetroArch around 2015. Before then, I had been using a bunch of disparate emulators, each of various provenance. What RetroArch does is provide a single solution for all your retro and venerable gaming needs. So let's open the program. You can either use a keyboard and mouse or a controller to navigate the menus. When you first open up RetroArch, you might or might not have the same menu as I do, so if you want to change that, you'll want to go to the settings, user interface, menu, and then you'll have a number of choices for menu. I recommend using XMB as it's the cleanest and easiest to navigate and is reminiscent of the PS3 root screen. Once you get your menu set up, it's time to get some emulators. To do that, you go to Load Core, scroll down to Download a Core, and then select the cores you want to download. As you can see, you can pretty much emulate every classic or venerable system known to man. Each core will have its own strengths and weaknesses, so you may need to download multiple cores of one game system to get a game working or to have the options that you want. After this, you'll want to get some ROMs. As you might imagine, I can't tell you where to get them, but Reddit, despite its toxicity in places, is still a good place for finding certain read-only memory files, and a basic search should be all that is required. Keep in mind, you want to check the comments to ensure that what you find is legit. Also, some ROMs will work better than others, and if one ROM does not work, others might. So be sure to experiment, and if a game doesn't work with the ROM you have, download another one and it may work. Once you get your ROMs, put them in a folder just called ROMs. You don't really need to do that, but it does make them easier to find. Make sure to make subfolders for the various systems you want to emulate so you can keep your ROMs in order. You will potentially need to have a decent sized hard drive due to the size of some ROMs. NES games will be kilobytes, but ISO-based games can get pretty bloody big. Some systems that you'll want to emulate will require what is called a BIOS file. You will need to find that on your own too, just check Reddit. You will then need to go to your root RetroArch folder and then find the system subfolder, and that's where you'll put all your BIOS files. Once you have both your ROMs and emulator cores downloaded, you got a few choices on how you can run them. You can go to load content and then find the games you want to play, select a core, and then run it. This works, and it's how many games will need to be run, but you can scroll to scan directory and have RetroArch scan your ROMs folder and have your games displayed on the main RetroArch screen. However, not all games will show up, and even now in 25, not all ROMs are picked up by the scanner. A ROM can still be played even if it's not picked up by the scanning program though, so I recommend scanning your ROM directory, but remember, not everything will show up. All of your games will be broken down into system categories. You can change what these categories look like by going back to Settings, Appearance, and then Menu Icon Theme. Alright, now I got a few more things we can do in the RetroArch menu. You can download thumbnails for your games by going to Online Updater and Playlist Thumbnail Updater. Keep in mind, this will fill up your hard drive, especially if you have a small one. It's kind of finicky, and not every game will get a thumbnail. You then have your favorites list. When you are in a game, you can go and add it to favorites. You then have another list called Recently Played Games, and that will show you what you played last. If an emulator core doesn't load, the game you wanted to try to play last may not show up. Finally, you got the ability to play games online. You can host a server or connect to a NetPlay server, and this mostly works, but there are issues with desyncing, so keep that in mind. And you can use save states with NetPlay. When you go to launch a game, you'll be given a submenu. If you've not played the game before, you must associate a core. For Donkey Kong Country here, I find that SNES 9X 2010 works really well. For Super Nintendo, there are cores that really don't get the sound right, so your mileage may vary on what is the best emulator core. Once you are in the game, you can just play it with whatever controller you got, or keyboard and mouse. I recommend controller, and there are a good number on the market today worth using. If you want something old schoolish, you can get an 8-bit DOE controller, and they come in retro-ish styles. I actually owned one of those 8-bit DOE controllers, but I returned it due to it being a bit too small for my bloody plate-sized hands. I personally prefer to play retro or venerable games. Okay, a retro game is something from 20 years ago. A venerable game is something from 30 to 50 years ago. So yeah, as of 2025, Donkey Kong's is now venerable, seeing as how it's a grand total of 31 years old. Yeesh. Anyway, I play these games with an Xbox controller. Pretty much if your game loads, it should be good to play right out of the gate. If it doesn't load, you may need to do a little configuration. F1 will bring up the in-game menu, F2 will save state, and F4 will load state. You can also save and load from the in-game menu. Many classic games are rock bloody hard, such as Donkey Kong here, so save states are a must to even consider finishing the bloody game. From the in-game menu, you can assign a save slot, and you have the all-important undo save or load. That's for if you save state in the wrong place or quick load into death. You can also restart content or exit the game entirely or just return to the main menu. You then have your core options. The options you get here will depend upon the core and the system you are emulating, and some will have more or less options. You don't really need to touch this all that much unless you care about the graphical fidelity, and you can make some of these old games really shine. Next, we have controls. Most of the time, the default controls will be great, but you can have the left joystick on the Xbox controller take the place of the D-pad, and oh, by the great Space Dragon, ladies and gentlemen, does that make playing some of these old-ass games much more fun. You can record, you can stream, and you can play with the latency. You can also use the rewind feature as well. I've not tried streaming with RetroArch as I use OBS, so I cannot comment on the RetroArch streaming abilities. Nor do I record with RetroArch either, as I just use the recording software that came with my graphics card, so I can't really comment on that either. Latency is usually good from the start, but you might be more sensitive to that than I am. And so that's pretty much all you need to know to get started with RetroArch. The best part about RetroArch is how very little configuration you actually need to do to go from zero to playing. There are a ton of venerable and retro games to play, and I can't really list them off here because this video is just about getting emulation to work. But here's a few recommendations. For the NES, I recommend playing the classic Contra, Super C, Batman, Double Dragon, Dragon Warrior 1 and 2, Journey to Silius, Marble Madness, and it's a rite of passage to go back to the oldie days and play the original Super Mario Bros. And it's amazing how well that game has held up after 40 bloody years. I may be old, but I never owned a Nintendo Entertainment System, and my first console was a SNES back in 1994, and the first game I played on it was Super Mario All-Stars. This is the best version of the classic Mario games. Mario 3 is of course the best of the classic Marios by far, But be sure to give the original SMB and the USA version of Super Mario Bros. 2 some love. And for the Lotz levels, aka the real Super Mario Bros. 2, suck it, Nintendo. You then got the even better than Super Mario Bros. Donkey Kong Country, where you play as Nintendo Duke Nukem. Then you got just as good DKC 2, and then you got Power Rangers, a really bloody fun beat 'em up, F-Zero, my favorite racing game ever, Wings 2 Aces High, a really fun and addicting flight sim that introduced me to the very concept of World War I, Castlevania 4, a great side-scroller that is at least somewhat fair, Star Fox, a fun enough third-person flying game. Yeah, it might look old, but man, it was a milestone for gaming, and you're gonna be thanking the Omnisire for those save states, because this game is a real ballbuster. And last but not least, we got TMNT Turtles in Time. It's an amazing beat-em-up that I played online with RetroArch, and it's just as fun today as it was in the olden days. Now, the N64 was and is my favorite venerable console, and I have done numerous reviews for that system, so be sure to check the description box for all of them. Man, I gotta do a massive retro game recommendation video one day. But just to get you started, Turok 1, Turok 2, Rogue Squadron, Episode 1 Racer, GoldenEye, The World Is Not Enough, Winback Covert Operations, Shadows of the Empire. I could go on all day about how great the N64 was and still is. RetroArch can run PS2 and GameCube and Wii games. However, I recommend the standalone emulators for those three systems. To emulate PlayStation 2 games, you need to download a program called PCSX2. This was originally released in 2002? Man, it's older than I thought. Well, I started using it 10 years later in 2012. It was developed by the PCSX2 team, and it's still receiving updates to this very day. And man, it has come a long bloody way since 2012. This is the PlayStation 2 emulator, and man, this bloody emulator opens the door to a massive library of great and amazing games. During its development cycle, it's been getting better and better, where before you had to go into the various options to get a game working, now pretty much all the great PS2 games work right out of the box with zero configuration. You will need the BIOS files, so go to Reddit. Once you have those, you will need to get your ROMs, Reddit. After that, you can go into the settings. In the settings, you will have emulation. If a game does not work, this is where you will tweak the settings. There is a PCSX2 wiki that will have some information to help you get games working, but if you can't find it there, just check random YouTube videos, as oftentimes content creators will include the settings they use to get a game working. You then got the graphics tab, and this is where you'll be able to upscale games, and how much you want to upscale the games will depend on your system setup, but any modern PC should be able to max this out. Once you're in a game, hit the escape key to bring up all the standard options. A very few games might need you to set it to software renderer, but that's not common. F1 is save state, F3 is load state, and the other function keys will change graphical options. There is an almost endless number of great PS2 games, such as Time Splitters Future Perfect, Predator Concrete Jungle, Beck, Kill.Switch, Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, AVP Extinction, True Crime Streets of LA, and Mortal Kombat Annihilation are only to name a few. Dolphin is an emulator that was released in 2003. Man, that's also way older than I thought. And it's currently being developed by the Dolphin Emulator Project. The emulator emulates the GameCube and the Wii. This is a harder emulator to work with than PCSX2, and more games will need certain configurations to get working. Most GameCube games will be working right out of the box, but some may have graphical issues and slowdown. You got your typical settings, but remember, some games will need settings tailored to them, so be careful when you change them and remember what the default was. For the Wii, you have an option to use what is called a Dolphin Bar. This device can be found on Amazon for about $50 and allows you to use actual Wiimotes with your PC, and it works really bloody well. Just plug the Dolphin Bar into the computer via USB, and then all you need to do is to go into the Controllers tab and make sure to click Use Real Wiimotes. This emulator is a real processor hog, and it's kind of processor specific. I find that Intel processors work better with it, but a sufficiently powerful processor will work well enough. You have options for high-res texture packs, and they can be found on certain forums. Like with the other disk-based emulators, you will need a BIOS file, so be sure to check Reddit for that. For GameCube ROMs, I recommend F-Zero GX, Eternal Darkness. That, of course, is a great survival horror game. Star Wars Rebel Leader. This game took ages to get working. Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. For the Wii, we got Resident Evil 4 Wii, Wii Sports Resort, The Conduit. That's a first-person shooter and was an attempted Halo killer. That is fun enough. Donkey Kong Returns, and finally Dead Space Extraction. That game is an on-rail shooter. That is a fun Dead Space Gaiden game. There are a bunch of other emulators out there. Xbox has an emulator, but it's still in early days, and many of the games are still a work in progress. The Xbox 360 has an emulator. That is a bit finicky, but progress is being made. There is a PlayStation 3 emulator called RPS3. It takes a bunch of configuration to get working, and that needs a video on its own, but just know it exists. In the past, I did a video on DOSBox, and that is an emulator program that allows you to run DOS games, so be sure to check that video for instructions. RetroArch can emulate arcade games, but there do exist standalone arcade game emulators, with the most popular and well-known being MAME, or Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. I did a video on that emulator way back in the ye olde days as well, so check that one for instructions on how to get it working. A word of warning though, finding the right MAME ROM sets can be a little difficult, so check Reddit for the right packs.
Alright, lads and lasses, it's time to get out there and start preserving some classic media. And so, I am General Lotz, wishing you good Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, and good Jurassic Park the arcade game, whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.